Hi, history friends. Today we're going to be filling out our notes for chapter 22. America is going to become a world power during the years of 1890 to 1913. So we're going to start with a little bit of Chicago history. Miss Murdy always likes to tie in some of that local history when we're learning about history. So one person I want you to know is Jane Addams. Jane Addams formed something called the Hull House in 1889, and this was in Chicago. It was the first settlement house on the near west side of Chicago, and it was for women. So a settlement house would be designed to help immigrants get settled in their new lives, especially in the Chicago area. So that immigrants could come to the Hull House for lessons in literature, history, art, and recreational things as well. And it eventually spreads to several buildings. One part of the city was known today it's now known as the Pullman neighborhood. It's on the southeast side, so it's not very far from where the White Sox play baseball. But the town is pretty unique, actually. It didn't always belong to the city of Chicago. In the late 1800s, the town was built by a company called the Pullman Company, and the Pullman Company built railroad cars. And we know that railroad cars were very important, and these were refrigerated railroad cars, which made them even more important because they could help move the meat to and from Chicago. And so this town is unique because basically they designed this town for the workers. They said, come work for our company and then you can live here in our town. And we'll have schools and we'll have stores and everything that you would need to live there. Sadly, during the Depression, a strike will break out because they could not afford to pay their workers any more money, but they also did not give them any breaks on their rent. And so the company will actually go under and be lost. So eventually Pullman will actually be annexed into the city of Chicago, and now it is known as the Pullman neighborhood. We've talked a little bit about why people enjoy city life in Chicago and really any other city. So it usually means more jobs, better transportation, the location is good, and there's lots of opportunities for those leisure activities, things to do for fun, like riding bikes and amusement parks and sports and concerts. And so skyscrapers will continue to be built, which means there's more and more room for people to live in cities like Chicago. All right, 22.1 and 22.2. I'm going to put these two together today. Manifest destiny had been reached before the Civil War. So remember manifest destiny, that God wants America to spread from coast to coast. It's God's will that this happens. But during this chapter, we're going to see that America wants to expand even further. So Spain was controlling Cuba, and people were angry about the way they were being treated in Cuba. So our president at the time, President McKinley, sends one of our naval ships there, the USS Maine, to protect the lives of the Cuban people. The USS Maine will explode in February of 1898, and that shocks Americans. So the Secretary of the U.S. Navy at the time was Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy Roosevelt, and he will send a fleet of ships to the Philippine Islands. Spain promises to leave Cuba alone, and the U.S. says, hey, we do want to help the people of Cuba. And Spain gets very angry at this and actually declares war on the United States, and the United States will declare war on Spain. This war is going to last for only 4 months. We just got done talking about the Civil War, and that had lasted 4 years. So this war is actually one that's quite quick. Teddy Roosevelt will leave his job with the government, and he organizes a group of men called the Rough Riders, and they will charge and capture San Juan Hill in Cuba, and that's capturing the capital, which means America has won this war. An armistice is signed on December 10th, 1898. An armistice is to take a break in war, to talk about how the war will end. They're going to actually refer to this war as the Splendid Little War for America. It's difficult to think about referring to a war as splendid, but if you look at it from the context of the time period, we can see why. Because Cuba is going to become free. And that's good news for America because that means maybe they want to trade with us or be more open with us. So Cuba's going to be free from Spain. The second thing that happens, the United States will gain the country of Puerto Rico. Oh, more land. Think about that idea of manifest destiny. We're also going to gain power through Guam and the Philippines. So this is why we're calling it the Splendid Little War. We had a positive outcome because America won. The Philippines doesn't want to belong to the United States, so after 3 years of fighting, we will defeat them, which becomes a positive, again, that splendid idea, because America can now have a Navy base in Asia, which is important that we have ships all around the world in case of an emergency. Going on to the next section, we are going to increase our power then. One of the questions I asked you during the bell ringer was, why would America want to take over Hawaii? And so in 1900, we will turn them into an American territory. I'm hoping that in your bell ringer, you talked about how there's different goods and services there. It allows us to have land in the Pacific. Having more land equals more power. We are going to be welcoming new cultural aspects into our country. And so maybe those were some of the things you talked about. One thing I want you to know is called the open door policy. At this point in history, many countries controlled China. The United States says to these countries, hey, let's let China make their own decisions. Let's let China trade with the United States if they want to. And so people of China had not been very happy that their country was being controlled by several other different countries. And so there's going to be a rebellion, and it's known as the Boxer Rebellion. It occurred in 1900, and it was stopped pretty quickly. But the United States steps up and defends China again and says, let's follow something known as the open door policy. Keep the door open for trade. And we're going to help support China by setting up schools for them. So this will open up friendly trade for the United States and China for many, many years. And if you are aware at all today, we still do have trade with China. President McKinley had become a popular president because of all he had done, and we are now being recognized as a world power. That's what Chapter 2 is all about, imperialism, taking over more land, gaining more power, having those military bases throughout the world, trading with China. And so we're going to see an election in 1900. McKinley will win his second term in 1900, and he chooses Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, as his vice president. Imperialism had been the most important issue for his opponent, but McKinley and Roosevelt and other Republicans had avoided it. They said, we're doing things slowly and on our terms. We don't need to try and talk about world power so openly. We can just do it kind of behind the scenes, was their thought process. But less than 1 year after re-election, McKinley will be assassinated. So Theodore Roosevelt becomes the youngest president at that point in time. He became a very powerful president, and he believes in reform as well as strengthening our power abroad. So he is going to come up with this idea of a square deal, he calls it. Square is another word for fair. So he says America has problems. The people in the factories aren't making enough money. There's unequal opportunities and discrimination happening amongst different groups. So the workers of America should receive a fair deal. He's going to support the union workers in 1902, and it's the first time the government is actually going to support a union and a strike. So they're going to call him a progressive. That's another word from our bell ringer. Hopefully you noticed that the root word is progress. Teddy Roosevelt wants to make progress. So he did support African Americans. Not all progressives did, but Teddy Roosevelt did. However, his square deal was more beneficial for whites, but they're going to create something called the NAACP. And that is actually still around today, and the goal was to combat discrimination. During this time, we're going to see some political reforms happening. These progressives want to make progress. They want there to be reform. So they're going to say that people have the rights to approve and reject bills during a referendum. So we asked a couple of years ago, can the school use your tax dollars to build a new school? That's a referendum. Citizens can actually suggest new laws if they want to. And we can recall people from office if we don't think they're doing a good job. In addition, we now choose political candidates in the primary election. So this gives Americans more power. Muckrakers will come about. We've actually been talking about them for the last couple of class periods. The man who wrote the Jungle and exposed the meatpacking industry is a muckraker. He took the muck and he exposed it. That's what a muckraker does. And so helping immigrants was one of the major issues. And so Jane Addams and the whole House and even President Roosevelt said, we must all be Americans, nothing but Americans. One flag, one language, one set of national ideas. So the muckrakers are going to try and expose the muck and make progress. Roosevelt's going to try and rein in some of those big businesses. The businesses actually feared Roosevelt, so Carnegie and Rockefeller, because he's going to become known as a trust buster. Remember, in the last unit, we said monopolies were also known as trusts. So in that political cartoon below, you can see Teddy Roosevelt actually chiseling away and about to pop this giant monopoly or the trust, and the money is just pouring out. So he's going to do his best to try and break up those monopolies so that it's more fair for the American people. During his time, he was president when the Meat Inspection Act and the Food and Drug Administration Act was passed. So all of those are very important. But one of the things that he is most well known for is his conservation. He went camping with John Muir. We read about John Muir. He went camping with him, and after that came home and he went back to Washington, I should say, and went back to Washington, D.C., and decided to form the national park system. And then state parks are going to follow because of that. At this time, there's 3 foreign policies. When it comes to Europe, we will stay neutral. When it comes to Asia, we're going to get involved if it's related to trade. And if it's with Latin America, we said that we will come to the aid of any Latin American country. We will step in and take on police action if we need to, because they're so close to the United States. So the Panama Canal is going to be built with the help of the United States. We're going to pay them $10 million a year in terms of rent so that we can use this land to help us improve our trade. They called it the Big Ditch, and it was finished in 1914. And on the next slide, you're going to see just how helpful the Panama Canal is for trade and the United States. Instead of having to go that red route all the way around South America, now for trade purposes, the United States can use the blue route, which cuts the time in half. So Roosevelt developed this idea when we talked about imperialism a little bit earlier. He said, maybe we don't need to boast about being a world power, but if we do so behind the scenes, that will be helpful. And so he was quoted as saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. So he didn't like that the smaller countries close to the United States that are really in Central America, he didn't like that other countries were trying to take them over. So he said that he would use police power to protect them. And so we see here in these political cartoons that he is patrolling the lands and the waters of the Caribbean Sea, and that he's acting as a police officer here, trying to protect those smaller countries, mostly because they're close to the United States. And so we want them as our allies. And if anyone's going to be in charge of them, it should be the United States. Our last section of notes, Roosevelt enjoyed 2 terms as president, and he's going to convince the Republican Party to nominate William Howard Taft. Taft takes office in 1909, but doesn't get along with Congress. He passed the 16th Amendment, which approved income taxes for American workers, and he forms the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce. In 1912, the progressives didn't feel like Roosevelt, his plans had been carried out by Taft. And so Taft and Roosevelt will actually run both as Republican candidates, which is going to split the vote. We've talked about how that happens in history then. So the Democrats will nominate Woodrow Wilson, and he will win because Taft and Roosevelt had split the Republican vote. So this is going to be where we end our notes for today with the election of 1912. Woodrow Wilson is our president, and we are going to be done with the Chapter 22 notes for today. So go ahead and work on the questions that are on a Google form, and when you're done, you're going to turn those in. And then after that, there is a reading activity that you need to do. Just follow the directions on the Google Slides. If you need anything, you can email me. Thank you.